All right, we're going to get this started. So welcome everybody to Peter White Public Library. My name is Marty Ackitts. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for Peter White Public Library. And I have to thank a couple groups, as always. One of them is the Friends of Peter White Public Library, our wonderful, wonderful group that supports us here. If you are watching right now on YouTube or after the fact on YouTube, you can thank the Friends for that because they paid for all of the live streaming equipment that we have. And then the other group that I always want to mention because it's such a wonderful resource is the Carol Paul Memorial Trust. And we're going to have two concerts coming up tomorrow night and Wednesday night, hopefully on the steps. If not on the steps, they will be in here if it's raining. But the Carol Paul Memorial Trust Fund pay for all of our musical entertainment here, and it's a really, really wonderful resource. So we couldn't do a whole lot of what we do here at the library without those two. So aside from the concerts, tomorrow night we have a Blues Day Tuesday concert, and it's going to be a fabulous band. I don't know who it's going to be because the Marquette Blues Society picks them out. But they always pick out great, great performers. And I believe that it's going to be Eddie and the Bluesers tomorrow night. But if you show up and it's not Eddie and the Bluesers, you can't hold me to that. And then on Wednesday night, we are going to have Chris Valenti, who's going to be doing a concert on the steps as well. And if you've seen Chris perform, he's always fun, always entertaining. Does 50s, 60s, 70s, sort of old standard rock songs, and also does his own original work sometimes as well. But the one thing that I really want to highlight is that Cindy, who you're going to be hearing read tonight, is doing a workshop tomorrow as well. In the Shiras room, starting at 1 p.m. I'm going to get this right because I sometimes get this wrong. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. up in the Shiras room, and the title of the workshop is Writing in the Intersection, where poetry and micro nonfiction meet. And so Cindy can talk a little bit more about that and explain it, but there are still spots available if you are interested in showing up tomorrow and writing with Cindy. So I do encourage you. I say it is a registered event, but if you show up tomorrow at 1 p.m. and you're not registered, I won't kick you out of the room, I promise. Okay. So anyway, so that is tomorrow at 1 p.m. and I really, really would encourage you to show up for that. I think it's going to be a really fabulous afternoon. And then on this coming Friday is our first event of August, Friday, August 3rd. I think that's right. Yes, Friday, August 2nd, pardon me, from 2 to 3:30 p.m. at the Chocolate Bayou, the UP Land Conservancy and Peter White Public Library are teaming up for a special program called Eyes of the Earth, Witnessing and Responding to Nearby Nature. So what it's going to be is we're going to have someone who's going to talk a little bit at the beginning of the event about land conservancy and what they're doing to try to preserve the bayou and other areas around Marquette. And then we invite any kind of artist or writer, any kind of artist in any media to show up for that. If you're a photographer, painter, poet, it doesn't matter. And then we release the artists into the bayou, and then you go out and you respond to it in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's going to be really wonderful afternoon. There is a rain date, so if it's raining on Friday, which I don't think it's going to be, but if it does rain on Friday, the rain date is August 3rd from 2 to 3:30 p.m., so the next day on Saturday. And we do have lots of, we have about 4 or 5 cameras that will be available for people to use at that event if you are interested in doing that. And you can use those for free. The film is going to be for free as well. So you use one of those cameras, you show up, you can take some pictures, and the goal of that whole endeavor is to create a little booklet that the person, his name is Will, from the UP Land Conservancy, he's going to put together this little booklet of that afternoon, and I think it's going to be a really, really wonderful thing to come out of that afternoon. Lots of other great stuff coming up in August. I really encourage you to pick this up. I'm going to do a short intro for Cindy. I could go on and on about Cindy because she's just a wonderful person. But I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we did this morning with Cindy. We got together, a group of us, and everybody that was on this hike is in this room right now. And we hiked up into Dead River Falls. And it was just this wonderful time being out in the woods with artists and poets and hiking along there and seeing the natural landscape. And you know what? The person who put us all to shame is sitting in the front row right over here. Christine was along with us, and Boy, I want her. If I ever get lost in the woods, I know who I want with me because she was amazing, and Cindy was as amazed as I was. So, but anyway, Cindy has published quite a bit. Her latest book is Far Company, which came out in 2022. Okay, thank you. 2022. It's a beautiful, beautiful collection. And then her previous book, Harborless, probably most of you know, was a Michigan Notable Book when it was released. And it's also really, really wonderful, a wonderful collection. And she does all kinds of other things too. She's going to talk about a really interesting art books that she puts together with her poetry. And we're hoping to get her back for the Great Lakes Poetry Festival to do a workshop on that as well. So I don't think I have to twist her arm too much to come back to Marquette at all. So please put your hands together for the wonderful Cindy Hunter Morgan.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you all for being here. I love coming here. Marty knows that. It's a pleasure to be in this library, to be in Marquette, and to share poetry together, and to have the space in which to do that. And our hike was wonderful today. Thank you, all of you who shared that and who are here again. Thanks. Yeah, Marty mentioned a kind of a variety of projects that I have been working on, and I think I'll start out the reading with some new work that is part of a manuscript. I'll try not to spend too long explaining it. It started with letters I decided I would write to Emily Dickinson. And those letters all started with something from, I think it was usually a first line from one of her poems. I wound up doing some of that with Merwin and Far Company, as some of you know. But I would take that first line and then I would just use it as my entry into a letter to Emily. And I made that into a little artist's book. I don't have it actually. But Passages North published 3 of those letters that are included in this artist's book that unfolds as an accordion of envelopes. And there's 10 letters to Emily in that little book. And Passages North published 3 of them. So I'll read 2 of them tonight, and then I'll let you go find the fantastic Passages North website to find the 3rd if you want. The little book, right now, I've said that I would limit it to 10 copies. The one copy is in St. Olaf College Library's special collections. So I'll start with that. I didn't know I was going to continue that, but it did. And I wound up writing to other people. Criteria for inclusion in this project is that the people must be dead, and they must be featured on a U.S. postage stamp. But so one of the letters so I've written to Emily Dickinson, Audubon, Johnny Cash, Noah Webster, Duke Ellington, Amelia Earhart, Houdini, Elvis, Edgar Allan Poe, Robert Frost, Julia Child, Duke Ellington. Did I mention Duke Ellington? Oh, Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson is the one person who unfortunately is not instantly recognizable to everybody, but she should be. So one of the letters to Johnny Cash was made into a short film a colleague of mine at MSU, Peter Johnston, we founded a film festival called Filmetry, which is a combination of film and poetry. And we pair poets and filmmakers so that filmmakers are adapting existing work. It's not generative on the poet's end, and make them into short films. And so Pete made one of those letters to Johnny Cash into a short film. You can find it online. Google Peter Johnston, Dear Johnny Cash. MSU Libraries has the little book to Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm doing a variety of things with them, but let me start out with the reading. I will dispense with the signature line, which I think would sound a little funny if I kept saying, yours, Cindy, sincerely, Cindy. So they are here. Know that I do sign them, but I'll dispense with that for the reading. Dear Emily Dickinson, this is my letter to the world. No, just to you. We can visit here without worrying about whether we've combed our hair or vacuumed. I'd vacuum more often if it were a quiet chore. I like those silent, cordless vacuums you sometimes see in restaurants. How do they work? People just push them back and forth, sometimes right beside your table while you're eating. It would be a good tool for a spy. One time I dropped a French fry just to see if the little machine was up to the task. I felt like I was feeding a carnivorous plant. The bird must sing to earn the crumb, but the vacuum is delivered right to it. I almost read the signature. So you can see what I'm doing is like dispensing with chronology or the expectations of chronology and distance and time and what is possible and what is impossible. And I love that about letters. I think that's the joy and pleasure of a letter, and it's the joy and pleasure of reading a letter that isn't even supposed to be to you or for you. It feels like a kind of eavesdropping. Yeah. And I actually I teach creative writing at Michigan State, and one of the things that I sort of break the semester up with when I think my students are ready for a little break, they have to draw names, and they have to write a letter to each other. They love it. And then some of them correspond forever. So it has facilitated some significant relationships, I think. Here's another one to Emily, and it begins with a line many of you will recognize, I felt a funeral in my brain, which is from her poems, and you can sing that too. All of her poems are in hymn meter, so you can, sing it to Amazing Grace. Dear Emily Dickinson, I felt a funeral in my brain, and now I keep thinking about the casket, where it is right now. If it's still with other memories in short-term storage, or if it has traveled in a clean black hearse to its final resting place in long-term storage. Where is the hippocampus? I can't find it. This morning I did yoga, which allowed me, during one of the more meditative poses, to travel into my brain. My body into my brain, self into self, kind of like turning a sock inside out and scrunching most of it into the toe. So what you wind up with is a little lump of a sock. I turned myself into a little lump of a sock until almost all of me was inside my head, which is rather like the toe of a sock. The brain is surprisingly well lit, and I found the dark hearse and followed it with all of the stealth and cunning of a Russian spy. I felt like I was Pac-Man, and the black hearse was one of the ghosts, and at any moment the hearse ghost would turn and double back on me. I knew it would never turn blue, and I would never be able to eat it, so it wasn't exactly like Pac-Man, but how could a casket in your brain ever be exactly like something else? I Extricating yourself from your brain is sometimes tricky, but that's also what yoga is for, although you have to know which poses tangle and which poses untangle. I don't take classes, I just do it by myself in the living room. As ever, Cindy. I think I do have to read the signatures. So those first two, you can find them, should you want to return to them, on the Passages North website. It's a fantastic website. If you don't find those, read something else, because it's full of good work. And it's the literary journal right here out of NMU. And this one, here's another one to Emily, which is not on the Passages North site. Dear Emily, an awful tempest mashed the air. You might think air cannot be mashed, but it is as mashable as potatoes or avocados. After the tempest, which was purple and black and a little bit gray, as some tempests are, the air wasn't even air. Some part of it was gone. The C or the O or the 2 or the N or the H, I don't know. There is no exact chemical formula for air. And when it's mashed, some of the C's and the O's stick to other letters. When you rearrange letters, you get new words. And when you mash air, you get new air. This is why I used to like tempests, even though they are generally purple, and I'm not fond of purple. I thought new air would be a welcome thing, but it turns out it's not really air at all once you change too many C's or O's. When the tempest blew through last night, I hid in the fruit cellar, where the air is good and stale and resistant to alteration. I wish I had more fruit in the fruit cellar, but mostly it's full of empty cardboard boxes and camping gear and wrapping paper. There is some maple syrup and a few cans of beans and one jar of jam my aunt canned a few summers ago. I won't open it because I like going down to the fruit cellar and finding homemade preserves. And here's a letter to Audubon. I pulled, like, you can see it's not a thick stack. So I pulled these out of a larger stack, which is the manuscript full of letters. And there is another letter to Audubon that mentions a woodcock I saw a couple summers ago drinking from a mud puddle on that road, that twisty road to Chris Point Lighthouse. And it was just I came around a curve and there it was. So maybe that would have been a good one to read here, but I don't have that one here. Dear Audubon, I hung suet early this year, not because I was particularly organized, but because I was eager for the companionship of birds. I have feeders outside 2 kitchen windows. When the birds first discover or rediscover these stations, I cede them certain territory. If a bird visits the feeder near the kitchen sink when I'm standing at the sink, I either don't turn on the water or don't turn it off. I'm loath to alter the soundscape, afraid if I spook them they won't return. I cater to them in this way for a week or so, then slowly resume activities until the birds grow accustomed to my habits of movement and the whistle of the tea kettle. This morning, the vacuum didn't even bother them, and today, when I was washing a carrot, I looked into the eye of a downy for more than a minute. Marina Abramovic did this with people, 850,000 of them, for 75 days at MoMA. Visitors came to sit across from her and stare into her eyes. It was allowed. It was art. You can't do it on the subway. Maybe I shouldn't have done it with the bird. Maybe I scared him. The eyes of a woodpecker are like little silicone nitride balls set inside the rims of little bearings. I might just as well have stared inside the wheel of a skateboard. Do you ever feel that way when you look at all of your dead birds? As ever, Cindy. Here's another one to Audubon. Dear Audubon, sometimes I listen to birds and assign typefaces to their songs. I think about the notes as letters, and I try to consider how much white space or silence is between them. I suppose this is a kind of synesthesia, but instead of seeing yellow or green when I hear music, I see Garamond, Baskerville, Optima. I also classify birds as serif or sans serif. The brown-headed cowbird, sans serif. The junco, sans serif. The pileated woodpecker, serif. The cedar waxwing, serif. It gets tricky. How would you classify the horned, but otherwise fairly plain lark? The killdeer? Yours, Cindy. And one more to Audubon. Dear Audubon. Today I caught a hawk moth. I watched him in a mason jar for about 5 minutes and then let him go. I thought of that day in May when you released the redpoll in London, how something in you lifted when the bird flew. Have you ever flown a kite? Did it feel always like holding the jesses of a tethered hawk? I have a stunt kite with 2 strings. When I pull one string, the kite tumbles into somersaults. When I pull the strings untwist. When I pull the other, the strings untwist. Sometimes the kite nosedives during one of these maneuvers. It's always violent and sudden, and every time I retrieve the kite, I feel like I'm approaching a wounded bird, its wings still flapping, like something trying to rise again. As ever, Cindy. And this is one to Amelia Earhart. The letter began when I was sitting outside next to the lake at our family cottage, which is Shupak Lake, northeast of Grayling, about a quarter mile from the Au Sable. I'm looking at Bud and Chris here and laughing because I just told them about this location of which they were already aware. Bud knows it well. But there's a lot of military territory there. And so there are thousands and thousands of acres of woods, lots of jack pine, lots of 2-tracks. And it's training territory. So sometimes the jets do come through, and that's where this letter began. But then it also, the letter mentions a memory of seeing other jets fly by right by Autrain Bay. And the letter mentions that it was a few years ago, and the truth is, it's really interesting how a few years ago can actually mean 30. Dear Amelia Earhart, today 3 A-10s flew over the lake. I was sitting outside reading a book. I heard them first, then stood up and cranked my head back to find them. I almost tipped over. 1 is a little bit exciting, but 3 is very exciting, and they flew over low and banked until they were sideways. Then they disappeared, but a moment later they came back. They returned one more time. Each time it sounded like they were ripping the sky open. I wonder what the loons thought. If they heard it as a kind of strange thunder, or if they intuited an apocalypse. I worry that the loons will give up on this place and move to Canada. A few years ago, up on Lake Superior near Autrain Bay, an F-15 flew by so low I could see the rivets. It felt like the aliens had finally arrived. As ever, Cindy. And here's one to Houdini. Dear Harry Houdini, the mirror is the first magic trick. You look in it and see someone who does everything you do at the same time you do it. Smile, point, turn your head, tilt it back. But try to touch your twin and the magic goes cold. The game both accelerates and disintegrates, and you encounter the first truth of magic. It works because it deceives you. Houdini, I'm tired of being tricked, but I still want magic. Can our eyes ever be trusted? Maybe not philosophically. I suppose one trick to some magic, your magic, is finding people who don't want to understand it, who accept deceit as a kind of pleasure. John Berryman wrote, These songs are not meant to be understood, you understand. They are only meant to terrify and comfort. As a performer, which do you prefer, terror or comfort? Sincerely, Cindy. P.S. Peekaboo, I think, is the second magic trick. And here are a couple to Duke Ellington. The first one, I'll read this. I chose this one in part because it mentions anatomy of a murder. And I'd been up there before, but I drove up there last night with John Smollins and Ellen, and so it was fun to see it again. Dear Duke Ellington, your smile is one of the best parts of Anatomy of a Murder. There are a lot of parts I admire in that movie, including the wallpaper in Paul Beagler's foyer and the fish in his refrigerator, but your smile is up there. Your music, of course, is even better, stylish and cool. It's strange to see you in the movie, kind of like seeing Tom Petty in The Postman, except, well, I'm sorry to compare Anatomy of a Murder to The Postman. People think acting creates some opportunity to swap roles or assume new ones, but you didn't really have that opportunity, did you? I bet nobody said, hey, Duke, want to audition for the judge? You were playing Duke Ellington, even if they did give you a new name. The guys in your Roadhouse combo are the only black people in the film. Everyone's dancing, but Paul Beagler is the only person who really acknowledges you. He sits down at the keyboard with you. He touches you when he says goodbye. Did you feel that? I mean, both the touch and the absence of touch? I won't try to draw your smile, which is too good for my hand, but I did draw part of the pattern of that wallpaper I like. It's just black and white because the film is black and white. If it were my pattern, I'd take out the drawing of the house, which would move the whole design closer to William Morris. It's kind of Scandinavian now, which is right, I suppose, for Ishpeming. Here it is without the house and without the necessary repetition to make it a real pattern. There it is. Rather small. And I need some water. Hold on. This next one mentions a Duke Ellington composition. I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart, which he recorded as an instrumental, but then I think like really soon after that recording, various people set lyrics to it. Anyway, this letter mentions that song. Dear Duke Ellington, I let a song go out of my heart. Sometimes it isn't as hard as it would seem. Maybe it's not all that different from letting a fly out of the house. It's true, that's often tricky. But say, as happens, you accidentally let a fly in your house while you're carrying a plate of picked-over chicken inside on a Saturday evening in August. Say the fly is inside on the screen door, and you open the door to let it out, and instead of flying deeper into the interior of your house and darting behind the curtains, it leaves. Sometimes a song slips away just as willingly. I like your song very much, probably better without the tacked-on lyrics. Do you think it's peculiar or just inevitable that wordless music is titled with words? Do you think it's peculiar or just inevitable that some songs long lodged in your heart can fly out without even singing? Sincerely, Cindy. So I'll segue now into poems. I mean, that's a kind of hybrid form right there. Those letters they have the compression and distillation of poetry, but they dispense with the line break, and they operate a little differently than poems. They're its own. They're epistles, so they are their own form. But I'll do a little well, here, let me find. I have to read from this. I don't have a copy. Anyway. I think I named off most of the people I was writing to, but I didn't mention Mark Twain. I am writing to Mark Twain. I'm not done with those letters. I just had a really wonderful fellowship out in Elmira, New York at his summer home, Quarry Farm. And so I lived in that house for 2 weeks and cooked in the kitchen where Marianne Cord cooked for him, and it was quite an experience. But when I applied for that, my proposal mentioned, here's what I'm going to work on. And this is one of the things I worked on. I made it into one of those artist books. It's a little big. It loses some of the magic, I think, when they get bigger, but it's all one stanza. I didn't want to split up the stanza. The poem should be all one stanza, I think. But so I'm writing a series of letters that will be part of this manuscript in which other letters appear. That I'm doing that, but I've also been working on some poems. And so most of the poems engage fairly directly in some way with something I have extracted from his work. And in this case, there is an extraction from The Innocents Abroad, and then there's a quote that's often misquoted to Twain. Now I forget who it's actually. See, I'm contributing to it. I forget who said it. If you told me, I'd say, yes, that's it. It's misattributed to him often. But the two quotes are, the poem is called Weather Advisory. The first quote from Mark Twain in Innocents Abroad here's the quote. From my window here in Bellagio, I have a view of the other side of the lake now, which is as beautiful as a picture. A scarred and wrinkled precipice rises to the height of 1,800 feet. On a tiny bench halfway up its vast wall sits a little snowflake of a church. So I was thinking of that simile, the little snowflake, of how he turned a church in the distance into a snowflake, and admiring that, because that's what poets do, right? We find a way to turn one thing into another thing. And then I was thinking about the misattributed quote to Twain, everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. And I decided to kind of get like hyperbolic with thinking about what could look like a snowflake, and then getting a little more serious about like thinking about climate change. This is entirely imagined. The children in here are entirely imagined. The teacher's entirely imagined. But you can do that when you're a poet too, and nobody asks you if it's true or not. But I'm telling you right now, it's entirely imagined. Weather advisory. In the classroom, children fold paper to cut into snowflakes. Their teacher demonstrates, holding her finished flake in the air, a gesture which also shows off her new diamond, so like the star of a snowflake. Later, in the teacher's lounge, she stares at mold on someone's forgotten cheese. How like hoarfrost, she thinks. And the granules of salt in the jar beside the napkins, like corn snow. And the crushed white box flattened by the wheels of a school bus outside the window? How like a last patch of snow from some almost forgotten winter. And the cracked geode on the sill, full of crystals like snowflakes, and the tub of crumbled feta she packed for her own lunch, a little stash of aging snowflakes saved in the Museum of Refrigeration. And the politician on TV talking about climate change, his cufflinks sparkle like snowflakes. Outside, on recess duty, she scolds two children in spring jackets for tearing apart a styrofoam cup they found under the monkey bars. But it's like snow when you crumble it, they protest. And so she lets them play with similes, language being the last bridge to the old world. And now I'll read a couple from Far Company and a couple from Harborless. Mari said I was reading from them, and I must. So, to stay this is becoming a little bit of a potluck, I realize, except I'm bringing all the food poems, right? So to maintain some consistency, I will, this poem from Far Company is, "These are the nights that Beatles love," and that's a line from Emily Dickinson, so there's a little thread there I'll pull through again. It's a good summer poem, but it's more than that too, maybe. These are the nights that Beatles love. It is true, these are the nights that Beatles love, and these days and mornings too. August is their favorite month. They have tracked the moon's orbit, checked the temperature of sand and gravel, measured the angle of the sun on the ferns, and noted how it looks this evening like a picture of sun on ferns. They know nobody you love is in the hospital. They know your parents are still alive. When you sit down with a bowl of orange sherbet and pause to consider the shape of sunshine on the porch floor, some general in their army of Beatles, Japanese June cucumber carpet carrying dung blister powder post, orders one armored creature, little tank, to rumble across the floor in front of you, right into the trapezoid of sunshine you have waited all summer to feel on your feet in this moment after dinner when you thought the world was perfect. And because of our hike today, I think there's more than one river and more than one poem, but I will read Forgotten Streams. And this takes the title and the first line from a poem of W.S. Merwin's, and then the rest is mine. Forgotten Streams, after W.S. Merwin. The names of unimportant streams have fallen off like shelves of ice into stronger currents. For a while, a few curled around the leaves of eelgrass, hid in silt, clung to moss on slippery boulders. Then they were vowelless, scoured, dissolved. We can't even pan for them anymore. When I open my mouth to name a few, it's just air rushing out of a dry canyon. What was the creek where my father floated on lost summer days? A swimming hole under a canopy of maples. Gone now, along with the name. But which went first, name or hole? And what was the name of the stream his grandfather fished? And will I be the last person in the world to say the name of my grandmother's brother, dead at 13 from pneumonia, gone more than a century? Theron. There, I've said it. Take the name with you. Carry it like a seed. I'll read one more from Far Company and then a few from Harborless. So this one too uses the title and first line from one of Merwin's poems. And it's thinking about my grandparents' orchard where I grew up playing and working. And they had lots of pasture land. Most of the pasture was woods. And it was a place I loved very much. Antique sound. There was an age when you played records made from shellac. And later there was another of vinyl. But these days I play topo maps cut into 12-inch discs, glued together to form two sides. I've been playing one map of an old orchard over and over, listening to the music of blossoms and the sound of the eastern ridge where the orchard ended. When I flip the map, I can hear the crinkle of frost crystallizing below that ridge, the sound of the river beyond the orchard. On the steep slope above the river is a thicket of grapevines, and when the map spins fast enough, I can hear the tags on the collar of a beagle jingle. She's flushed a rabbit, and soon she'll appear, her ears bleeding from briars. I am close to being there. I am stretched out on the floor with my eyes closed, just like a teenager. But the album ends too soon, as the best records do. When this one wears out, as it will, I'll cut a thin cross-section from the stump of an old apple tree, and I will play the rings through cambium, sapwood, and heartwood until the needle finds the pith. So there are many poems in that book, In Far Company, in which I am remembering my grandparents and that land we shared, the orchard. And I'll read just a couple from Harborless, which most of you know, but it's all of the poems most of the poems in the book are titled after the name of a ship, the year it went down, and then the body of water in which it went down. So most every poem has some nugget of historical accuracy, and then they move into imagination, and then there's a notes section at the back that, you know, when you want to know, like, okay, what's true here, you can flip to that notes section. And I'm just delighted that she left. Sorry, that came out, I'm just delighted that she left. So you'll have to edit that, Marty. Emily Nowak was here earlier, and she was a big part of the team at Wayne State University Press that helped bring Harborless out into the world. But she came. Let's leave it at that. Thanks, Emily. I just old friend is here, and I happened to help him. And I didn't help very much, haul a stove to the dump. So I will read a poem with some old stoves in it. So the Philadelphia, that was the name of the vessel, in 1893 went down in Lake Huron. It collided with a steamer and sank, and it's still down there. And it's part of that, and everyththere that's down there with it is part of the Thumb Area Bottomland Preserve. There's an imagined farm boy in this. There are several poems in Harborless that imagine a farm boy, and some of those poems are kind of like poems of the lake and the key of the land. What's true in this is that when the boat went down, it did go down with all of these old stoves. Philadelphia, 1893, Lake Huron. The ship sank with a load of cast iron stoves, which tumbled, lopsided, through white foam, green water, teal water, water as dark as coal, then darker. From deck to lake floor, they dropped 200 feet, plummeting past the white faces of lost men who stared, gaping. One man, hit by a stove, grasping for something, swung his legs around the belly of another stove sinking beside him and rode it to the bottom. When it settled in silt, he slipped off, an arm floating across his forehead, and slumped, exhausted, near the hearth, wreck of a boy in November, done with chores. And pretty soon it's peach time. Mighty close. Maybe we're there. Almost. and this is a good peach poem. The J. Barber was an old wooden vessel headed down the lake to Chicago with a load of peaches. So that's what's true here. Is it was full of peaches, and it caught on fire. And they don't know. They think what started the fire was like a rag on a hot pipe. J. Barber, 1871, Lake Michigan. Peach crisp, peach pie, peach jam, peach compote, whole peaches, sliced peaches. In those hours before the peaches burned, the whole ship smelled like August in a farm kitchen. The hold was full of Michigan orchards, full of juice and sugar and the soft fuzz of peach skin. The fuzz burned first, singed like eyebrows too close to a candle, and soon the skin shriveled, but not before each peach was seared. The sweet juice of summer, briefly concentrated and contained before everything cooked, oozed, dripped, and exploded. Peaches sizzled and spit as the ship burned, as the fire consumed what was made of sugar and what was made of wood, as masts toppled like limbs pruned from fruit trees, as men rolled across the deck like windfalls, bruised and scraped, and everything was reduced to carbon and loss. So I forgot where that is in Lake Michigan, but Bud brought me an article 2 nights ago about, and I hadn't heard about it, about the what was it, Margaret Muir? Margaret Muir? Yeah, found in Lake Michigan in May. It's wild to think what's down at the bottom of our lakes, and that was part of the pleasure of researching before I wrote these poems. So the idea of the cast iron stoves down there, the idea of all these peaches, and then the Margaret Muir went down with about 4,300 barrels of salt. It's just wild. I mean, there are cars, there are jukeboxes, barrels of whiskey, trains. There's whole locomotives at the bottom of the lake. It's wild. I'll finish. I'll read one more. I'll finish with the Omar D. Conger, which I think I've read every time I've come, but it's just such a wild story. So, and I have to tell you what's true right ahead of time, because it sounds like the part I'd make up. So the Omar D. Conger was docked in Port Huron in 1922, right in town. And so, it's like lots of pedestrians around, right downtown, lots of buildings. And when it was docked there, a boiler exploded, and the ship was, blown to pieces. And so everything that went up came down, and among those pieces that were blown up into the air and then came down was a 200-pound radiator, which, when it came down through the roof and then through the ceiling of the Falk Undertaking Parlor during a funeral service. So some of you have heard that story already a few times. Omar D. Conger, 1922, Black River. I'm going to back up for a minute, because then I'll be done, and I'll have to walk away, and I'll have forgotten to tell you or remind you about the workshop tomorrow, which is at 1, and I hope many will come. That last poem I read, was it the last one? The J. Barber, the Peaches poem? That is written as a prose poem. I dispensed with the use of the line. And that's one thing that we'll be thinking about tomorrow in tomorrow's workshop, is this intersection between, where poetry and really compressed creative nonfiction meet or can meet. I did mean to mention that. And I also very much want to mention, I think I've been moving my arms a lot. It just told me I met my goal. I want to thank you very much for being here. And Marty, thank you. It's just such a pleasure to come and read at the Peter White Public Library. Thank you very much. So I'll end with Omar D. Conger, and then I'm happy to answer questions if you have any questions, or just chat, and I'm happy to come back and sign books if you want a book signed. Omar D. Conger, 1922. Some said the radiator was a message from God, which caused more than a few arguments. Even among those who believed in a radiant God capable of flinging a heater through a funeral parlor, there were some who said the coming of the radiator was an expression of God's solidarity with those who grieved, and some who said the coming was the beginning of an 11th plague. Whether it was wrath or sympathy, darkness or radiance, hardly made sense to others who claimed it was only coincidence. But even some who favored coincidence came to feel differently about the word. They heard only coincide, which they mouthed silently to themselves, slipping in occasional variations. Homicide, suicide, genocide, so many sides. For them, the lexicon had changed. A word was redefined by tragedy, and in certain families in Port Huron, some smoldering remnant of that day lives in the language of those who survived the survivors. For them, every coincidence is a kind of death. That was a solemn one to end on, but thank you very, very much. And I'm really happy to answer questions, but it's a beautiful summer night, or it was the last time I looked outside, so you might want to get out there too. But yeah, if you haven't. Yeah, Lynn.
So regarding your letters, I was hearing them as poems. I was hearing.
Yeah, thank you.
And so I was kind of stunned when you said they weren't lineated. So I wondered, did you ever draft any?
No. No, because I think partly because the project began with such intentionality, right? Like I knew I was writing letters, and for me, I already had this sort of built-in go-to form for that. But thank you. I mean, I want them to have a bit of that quality. Sure, absolutely, yes, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, what's the scope of your project, and do you think you'll have an audio component like we're hearing in here?
Oh, that would be fun. The scope, it's a manuscript now. I just need to add in the Twain stuff, and it's a full-length manuscript. It's the longest manuscript I've ever had, actually. So I hope that it's a book. Right now it's just a manuscript, but that's my hope. And then the artist book component, I'll continue with some of those, because that's really how it all started. Yeah. Yeah. No, and the artist books even, they begin with poetry too. Here, I'll pull one out and hold one up for you. Or a couple. So they're really small quantities. They take hours to make, but these happen to be a kind of accordion style, and that's like a linen book cloth, and then this one has embroidery built into the paper that I've sewn into the paper. And this poem, it's a poem, and I'll never become such a book artist that's all of my artist books will always begin with text, I think. This is that's a Strawberry Thief, famous William Morris Strawberry Thief, and I was thinking about the Strawberry Thief and Morris and his engagement with that, and then I wrote a poem that's sort of in conversation with the Strawberry Thief. with Morris. So that's how my artist books begin. They begin with text. Yeah. Yeah.
And how is it printed?
It is, yeah, which is part of the tricky part. It takes a lot of fiddling to get that lined up right, because the folds have to be pretty precise, and yeah.
I guess what I'm asking is it a font or is it script?
It is, the typeface varies. I do it on, I print it out on my inkjet printer. This happens to be, I actually downloaded. So William Morris, he was like into everything. And he designed typefaces too. So this is True Golden, which is one of the typefaces that William Morris designed. And I thought, well, it's only appropriate to use a Morris typeface for a poem that's engaging with Morris's work. But I print them out on the, yeah, it's pretty 21st century, 20th century actually. I'm happy to talk more. I can head back there. Thank you so very much for coming.
So good.